this organization called B4U-ACT. And at that time, I was telling you that, this is a group of people who actually want to legitimize pedophilia, basically. And it actually really goes farther than that. But at the time, I told you that I had contacted Bob Hamer, who is actually a former FBI agent, retired actually, FBI agent. I guess he's never a former one, but he's retired. Because the first time I met Bob was a couple of years ago when he wrote a book called The Last Undercover, The True Story of an FBI Agent's Dangerous Dance with Evil. And I tell you, this is a great book. It's a riveting book, but it's a real book. It's his story about how he went in undercover to NAMBLA, which is the North American Man Boy Love Association. And so anyway, Bob got back to me, and so he's here on the line today to discuss this and a whole bunch of other stuff that we can talk about his other books as well. But Bob, welcome back to the show. I'm glad that you've cleared your schedule so I can talk to you again.
Hey, I appreciate you and Randall allowing me to come back on the show.
Yeah. Well, tell everybody a little bit more about your background, because I know that you have a very prestigious background, and I think people should know a little bit about it. That way they kind of understand what you're, why I wanted you to speak on this, because you're definitely an authority on the subject.
Well, I certainly wouldn't describe it as prestigious, and I know my wife wouldn't either, but I have to deal with her separately. I spent 26 years in the FBI, many of those years undercover. Some of those undercover assignments lasted maybe a day or two, others more than 3 years, so I played the role of the contract killer, the fence, the international arms dealer, a degenerate gambler, a drug dealer, and as you mentioned, I was infiltrated NAMBLA, the North American Man Boy Love Association. So I spent 3 years in that organization. Now, that wasn't a day-to-day basis, face-to-face, every day with members of the group, but I was in the group for 3 years, and as a result of our investigation, we eventually took out 8 members of the group's inner circle. And if you believe their signed sworn statements, as a result of our infiltration, they will no longer meet together or meet publicly. They do all of their meetings now over the air or through the internet. So that was an important undercover case for me, and it was probably my most difficult assignment. I mean, I was the undercover agent in the LA Mafia family case where we took out the top 15 guys in the family. I worked street gangs in South Central Los Angeles, buying drugs from gang members. I took out the number 2 man in the Mexican Mafia. So, I mean, I dealt with some very dangerous situations. I've shot people. I've been shot at. But this was my most difficult case, and clearly, to me, it was probably the most disgusting case because I was dealing with men who were sexually attracted to boys, and they openly told me about what they had done to little boys in the past and what they planned on doing to them in the future.
Yeah, I can only imagine not wanting to, having the restraint to hold back wanting to harm anybody, because I know me. And I can only imagine what that was like. And I want everybody to know, too, according to your website, you hear in 2009, The Last Undercover was named as the 15th Annual San Diego Book Awards Association Best Memoir in the General Interest category. So that was very cool. That's very cool. And the book is actually available on Amazon.com, everybody, or where books are sold, I'm sure. And I totally highly recommend it because it's not only is it very well written, Bob, but you lived it, and it's one of these books that you really can't put down. I mean, it's a hard book to put down. So. Well,
thank you. I mean, it's not a light bedtime reading.
No.
It's certainly a very difficult subject, and what the book does, The Last Undercover, it chronicles that 3-year infiltration into NAMBLA. But then I've broken it up, and I've discussed a dozen other of my undercover cases. Quite honestly, when I completed the book, and my agent was shopping it around to various publishers. We couldn't find a publisher that wanted an entire book on pedophiles. And it kind of shocked us, really, because we assumed with the success of Chris Hansen's To Catch a Predator TV show and Law and Order SVU, I honestly assumed that, you know, this NAMBLA book would be something that several different publishers would be interested in taking on as a project. And in reality, no one did. I mean, we had 24 rejections. Many, or at least several, said, hey, it's well written, but we don't want a book on pedophiles. And a couple others said, well, if you throw in more Undercover stories, we would consider publishing it. And I really, honest to Pete, I wasn't interested in pounding my chest and trying to say, hey, look at me, I'm really a cool guy. I worked undercover in the FBI my whole career. But I was interested in exposing the organization and exposing the boy lover agenda. And I think it's interesting, Stacey, and I appreciate you posting this article that appeared last week talking about this group, this B4U-ACT group that was holding a conference back in Maryland. I mean, when I wrote the book, it really chronicled this period from about 2001 to 2005. And even back then, the NAMBLA members, and we're talking the North American Man-Boy Love Association, they believed that they were the gay movement of the 60s and 70s. They believed that they were a civil rights movement that was going to be mainstream within a decade or two. And quite honestly, I laughed. I mean, you know, inwardly, I didn't laugh in their face, but I didn't think there was any way that this boy lover agenda, this way in which anyone would ever legitimize pedophiles. I didn't see this happening, and now we're seeing it. President Obama appointed Kevin Jennings as the Safe School Czar. Mm-hmm. Kevin Jennings was openly gay and admitted in his biography that he had counseled a teenager who admitted to him, Kevin Jennings was a school teacher, he admitted to counseling a teenager who admitted to him that the teenager was having sex with a man that he just met in a public restroom. Kevin Jennings advised him was make sure you wear a condom. I mean, it wasn't, hey, this is wrong, you know, we need to talk about this, I need to counsel you. It was, his advice was wear a condom. And Jennings admitted to this in his biography that he wrote about being a teacher and being openly gay. Now, this man ends up in the White House. He's in the administration. He has since resigned, not under pressure, under public pressure. He just resigned to move on. So I know that I can't say it that I saw any type of press release or anything, but I know NAMBLA and those people that support the boy lover agenda were celebrating Kevin Jennings' position in the administration. And now, as you point out, there's a group of psychiatrists and mental health professionals. Now, we're not talking about, you know, just a bunch of perverts hanging out at a public restroom. We're talking about mental health professionals that want to legitimize pedophilia. And here they're discussing it openly. They're having conferences about it. And their whole point is they want to remove the stigma of pedophilia and get that term and that condition removed under what your listeners may be familiar with, but it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Diseases and Disorders.
Right.
They want to legitimize that and say, no, it's not really a mental condition. It's nothing, and their hope is to remove it.
Yeah, you know, I have so much to say in response to what you said. I don't know if you know this, but Randall and I, my husband here, who I lovingly refer to as Bob sometimes, it's a long story. Anyway, Randall and I, we actually went undercover to a GLSEN conference in 2002.
Okay.
And we
GLSEN is Gay Lesbian Straight Education Network.
Yeah, that Kevin Jennings, started. And we actually heard this guy speak. I mean, in person, we were there undercover for a Christian right organization that invited us to go in. And that's actually what changed in that event, that 3-day weekend event that Randall and I were at, really changed the direction of my life. It did. And at the time, I think I was in grad school. I had just started graduate school to get my master's in clinical psychology. And since then, seeing all of that stuff and seeing how they promoted the homosexual agenda, especially Kevin Jennings, who exactly what you just said, everything you said is exactly right. I've gone to other conferences, except they're counseling conferences, headed up by the gay activists in that community. And it's really evil. So when I looked at this B4U-ACT site, and I actually first heard about it from somebody else in the pro-family organizations. But first of all, number one, I'm really surprised at how little airplay it's getting, how few stories there are on it. There's virtually no stories on it, Bob. I couldn't believe it. I'm thinking you would think this would be on Fox News on the front page, but nuh-uh, it's not. But I think what people, what I really want you on to talk about, because you understand this, you were inside NAMBLA for 3 years, and what I want people to understand is that not only is this a mental health organization with pedophile therapists and their, quote, allies, or have we heard that before, but they're trying to redo the language. Instead of calling them a pedophile, they're calling them they're minor attracted people. Doesn't that sound more benign? Gee, I'm just a minor attracted person. Yeah, who wants to have sex, an adult who wants to have sex with a kid. And they did it under the guise of, if you read their website very carefully, and I'm just repeating this because I said it Wednesday, but in case somebody didn't hear that, tell me, Bob, if this is something part of the NAMBLA playbook. Well, if you read their website, what they're basically saying is that pedophiles, well, they deal with anxiety and depression, but they don't really have a place to go in the mental health field because the world stigmatizes them as evildoers and doesn't like them. And so these mental health professionals with B4U-ACT are trying to create an environment so that pedophiles can go and see a therapist without that stigma. Not because the pedophile wants to change their, quote, minor attraction sexually, but because the pedophile has an issue with depression and anxiety, and he should be available, he should have the right to mental health treatment like everybody else.
And especially depression and anxiety arising from
society.
Exactly.
Right.
Society expressing their misguided disapproval of minor attracted persons.
Yeah, so my thinking is, number one, I think it's a bunch of BS that pedophiles even want help in the first place. So you can address that, Bob. Do they really want help? And number two, why would I want to send anybody to a pedophile who is a therapist? I mean, I raised this on a private counseling list I'm on. I said, when I was in graduate school and I went through all my hours and thousands of hours of training, not once did I ever have anybody say to me, a therapist can be a pedophile can be a licensed therapist and then possibly work with children. But we were warned that, the counseling situation is very intimate and, you need to be careful that you don't get sexually lured into a relationship with a client. But there was never, ever, ever even the thought of a pedophile therapist who might have the potential to work with kids. So.
Well, all of what you said, it's an interesting, and I will say that one of the people that we convicted in our NAMBLA case was a PhD psychologist, although he didn't really work with children. He worked with adults. I have a couple things, and I'm going to take, I guess slight issue with a little bit of what was said, in that I disagree with them. It's before you act. Hey, I want these people to seek counseling before they act. And if in fact that's what this group is trying to do, I agree with you. I don't think it's what they're trying to do. But if in fact that's what they're trying to do, before you act out and molest a child, we want you to be able to seek counseling and not worry about the counselor reporting you to law enforcement. And if that's what they're talking about, but that's not what they're talking about. I mean, they're trying to destigmatize the pedophilia, as I understand it. So there are those issues. I mean, they need counseling, and if they're afraid to go to counseling,